Okay, I'm back again for Odinmade Hero, the series where I learn from Casey Muratori, live on the air, how to make a game one day at a time, except I'm doing it in Odin, hence the name. And I don't know why, I just say it like that now every time because that's how he introduces it, basically, but, you know, as Handmade Hero, and I just can't help but have that wash off on me. But yeah, it's a great day to do the thing once again. We're going to write some more code. Yesterday, we were in the middle of a pretty big code change. Actually, I don't see that I'm live on YouTube, so let me verify. Okay. There it goes. There it is. Good job, YouTube. So yeah, yesterday we were in the middle of a pretty big code change, so I'm going to jump right back into it with Casey here as we try and flesh out the entity system that we've kind of started expanding. It's created quite a bit of change, but hopefully the place we'll wind up in will be at least moderately better. I know Casey will ultimately be not very happy with it and want to refine it even more by simplifying things past where he initially goes here at the end of today. But hopefully we'll get back to a place where our little hero is... what on earth? I guess oh, yeah, duh. Hold on. Let me just back this up real quick. I have to talk about this. I have to talk about controller input for a second because this came up yesterday. But yeah, so, you know, we're compiling and we're building, but we no longer have a hero. He has gone AWOL, and today we'll work on getting him back and getting the movement code working with the new entity system that we're kind of expanding here. So something that came up yesterday, there was an Odin contributor by the name of Skytrius who was, and hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, I'm not sure, but he was kind enough to encourage me to try out using an enumerated array because I had not really looked at that feature of Odin yet. And they suggested that this section right here, where we're using a raw union to kind of store an array as well as all these individual button states all in the same place. So that way, you know, I can access controller dot, you know, move up button, right? Or if I wanted to iterate over them, I could do it this way, right? For button in buttons. Well, yeah, just like that, right? So that's what this gives me. And it's a little bit funky just because this using thing is not... When you look at it, it's not obvious what's going on, I suppose. I mean, it is to me now just because I wrote the code, and at this point, I've done it 2 other times. Once in C and C++ going way back when, and then again in Zig. But in Zig, I had to do something where essentially, and I've mentioned this several times, where basically underneath a buttons member, I had both an array of the buttons and also a map, and then this was a union. So I had to access each of them individually by name. But this enumerated array thing, I spent all of 10 minutes last night looking at it, and it immediately clicked what I should do. To basically be able to get rid of this and just have this neat little buttons member that is an enumerated array of buttons up here that contain a list of different button states, right? Each button has its own button state, and this just kind of gives us almost like we're accessing it like a dictionary or a map. At least that's like how it feels to me, even if that's not exactly what's going on. But it also works as an array, right? So now I could do the same thing, right, for button in controller dot buttons. But I could also access them individually with this syntax here, like so. And that also makes it a little clearer what's going on when you access it off the controller. You know, look at the buttons and give me that, move up button. And this feels better than how I wound up having to do things in Zig. And maybe there would have been a cleverer way to do this in Zig that I didn't discover. Maybe Zig has something similar to enumerated arrays. So this isn't me trying to throw stones at Zig or anything. I'm just saying that this was the solution that I had to have in Zig, and it didn't feel great. But this feels like a much better compromise. And so I went ahead and did that, and that was pretty straightforward. And, everything works just the same. I had to go and test it on a different repo that I have that's using a lot of the same code to make sure that the actual movement is working still, because we don't have a hero to move right now. So there's that. The other thing that I was thinking of looking at using the enumerated array feature is just classic me. This is a me problem. Every time I find out about a new language feature, in whatever language it is I'm using, I'm like, ooh, I want to go and use this everywhere, right? And maybe that's not a very uncommon problem. Maybe that's actually really common. In the same way that, like, you learn about OOP for the first time, maybe, and nobody tells you that there's a lot of caveats here when you consider using OOP seriously in a serious project. But then, you just want to turn everything into an object, and you want to use all of this this fun inheritance. And then what even is OOP really? Like, all of these, well, it's about objects. Well, no, it's about message passing. It all depends on who you talk to sometimes. Why is my monitor over here flashing? I don't like that. Computers, am I right? They're just weird. They just do weird stuff all the time. So anyway, I was looking at how I might do that for this new entity system that we're working on. And I think that same Odin contributor that was hanging out with us in chat mentioned maybe that's not the best fit here. And also just looking at it, like, I don't see an obvious way to use that. Like, I see an enum, right? And I'm like, well, how do I use this to do an enumerated array? And it's not obvious to me how I would do that, or whether that's worth doing it, especially because we know that this code is in heavy flux right now. We're still in the middle of making this change. So at the risk of confusing myself heavily trying to get too clever, I'm just going to keep doing it more the way that Casey is doing it. And at some point, maybe it'll make sense to do it differently. But as far as I can tell, I don't know how you would even do it, because we have the difference with the way we're doing the buttons, right? Is and the other thing about this is that we can get rid of this assert using the enumerated array for the controller input. So that's nice. But the other thing about these buttons is that we have this buttons enum, and all of the objects, members of that array, I'm trying to find the right word here, are all the same type. Whereas we have these different kind of entity types based on their residency, right? And it's kind of strange. I think Casey winds up finding a more elegant solution here down the road. I just can't remember exactly what it looks like, where we basically don't have to store the residence or something along those lines. But I know, and I've mentioned this several times now, that at least one of these ideas goes away. I think it's this one. And then we basically just, again, wind up with entities that are dormant and they don't really update all that much. And then we have entities that are active, like in proximity to wherever the player is. So there you go. So with all that out of the way, thanks again to Skytrius for encouraging me to look at a feature I hadn't touched yet. I'm hoping that there's more opportunities like that pop up as we progress, and that'll just make it that much more fun to learn how a new thing learn a new way of looking at things, because the concept of an enumerated array was just totally new to me, and I like learning new things. So with that being said, we'll keep on working on this change and let Casey kick it off for us.
Let us get things under control. Okay, close this up. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Handmade Hero, the only show that you can even conceive of watching, really. Like, if you really just had to, in your mind's eye, I'm sure you can envision no other show that could ever even possibly exist across all of humanity, where people code an entire game from scratch with no engine and no libraries. It seems impossible. How do they even do it? And yet, night after night, it is getting done with just me and 1,000 of my closest friends. How long will we be able to keep this up? It's anyone's guess. It's really, you never do know. It surprises around every corner here at Handmade Hero, but that is certainly not going to stop us. We are going to continue until we have our own very little happy shining game that we can say we understood every last little bit of. And honestly, I think it's going pretty good so far. So why delay the inevitable? Let's just dive right into it. If you have pre-ordered the game, you should have gotten a link in your email with a zip file download sort of thingy from Sendal. You can download the source code every night from that. You can also download the test assets. If you download the source, it's a zip file that has a ton of zip files in it, one for each day. We're on day 52, so unzip day 51. And you put that in a directory, and you will be where I am. So you will be like able to totally just scoot in, kind of like one of those bicyclists that drafts off another bicyclist. You can just totally go for it. No headwind. It's great. All right, so let's see. I was rudely interrupted by the timer last time, who told me that it was the end of the stream, because I was right in the middle of making some major changes to the code base. And so what I want to do is go ahead and get back to those changes so that we can emerge from the other side of our change tunnel in a wonderful, where the bright light is shining and the unicorns run free and the rainbows are, gluten-free and everything else that happens. All right, so what I was doing is I was changing it. I was starting to play around with changing things over so that we would have entities divided up into pieces where we had ones that were sort of in the close range around the player, 1 or 2 screens away from the player. Those entities would be stored in sort of a high form. I'm going to get rid of that exists because we replaced that yesterday with this non-existent flag. We'd be stored in this high entity, and then we'd have low entity, which are entities that are being simulated but are further away from you and are getting updated perhaps at a lower resolution. And then we would have dormant entities, which didn't get updated at all. And so we were just kind of thinking of that through. Now, this is not set in stone by any means. These probably won't be laid out like this in the final version or anything like that, but I'm starting to play around because I want this basic structure, this basic concept anyway, that things get mapped in and out of sort of the working set around the player. And when they get mapped out, they're not totally dormant automatically. They could still be in sort of a low frequency update pattern, and that's where this would be. So let's see what's going on here. I think we were sort of in the process of, we were like sort of in the process of making the change, and we had to if zero a bunch of stuff out. So we have right now that move player. I'm going to go ahead and start working on some of this code that we just zeroed out. So when we do our move player code, now we really don't have to think about the tile map anymore for the most part. In fact, I really just don't even know if we're going to have to do anything with this tile map anymore, because really what we would have is we just have all of the tiles just be moved into that set as well. So when we come in, I feel like all of those tiles would essentially be sort of active entities. And the reason I say that is because I don't know that we really want tiles per se ever at all. We just kind of want stuff that's following the tile map. So if we have trees, we probably just want the trees to be in there, and we want the player to collide against the trees and stuff like that. So I'm going to assume that we're actually just go ahead and I'm going to just make that change while we're at it as well. And so thinking about that, I guess what I would say is our entity structures will also, let's say, why not? Let's just say their entity structures will also contain the actual tiles in them as well. And so if I wanted to do that, I'd have to start thinking about how I would do my collision detection, right? Because if I want to have entity-on-entity collision detection, which obviously we're going to have, we would need some way of binning them so we do some kind of a spatial subdivision to keep things, obviously, from getting too hectic. And so that would start to be sort of a retiling of things as well. And so that's kind of something to think about. It's kind of weird that we have all of these sort of different structures. And it does seem weird to have stuff like, oh, well, why do we have sort of these different levels of how things get done? But again, it all tends to shake out in the end, and you have to kind of go through a number of different iterations of how you structure things until you get something that you're very happy with. And so it's all just, don't worry about it too much. It's all just kind of the way things go on the road to getting something that feels good. And it's all about kind of seeing how that goes. So I think what we'll do first is just assume we'll test every entity against every other entity, which is n squared and really bad, so that won't be able to be used in the final version, but we'll just assume that's going to happen for now. And so we'll assume that what we would essentially do is just have entities for all of those tiles. And so in the high entity struct, that would be kind of a good argument against the way this dormant entity thing was working, where we had it backed, where we had them in parallel arrays, because we would want to basically have it so that the high entities could be brought in from other places. So I don't know exactly how I want to. I don't know exactly how I want to do that for right now, but yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and do it, and we'll see what happens. So if we were going to do that, right, then we no longer have to figure out where we are in this space anymore. We will have to do something like that when we actually want to we will have to do something where we have some kind of spatial partition. But for now, I'm going to ignore that. I'm going to say let's just ignore this stuff for now. Let's get rid of that there, and in fact, we'll get rid of this as well, like so. And I'm just going to go ahead and say, all right, for every entity. So we have an entity.
Okay, so it looks like, kind of like he's saying, I still can't really intuit this abstraction away from the tile map to where we just have a bunch of entities and they have a position. That was still pretty fuzzy for me yesterday, and so I'm thinking hopefully by the end of this stream that'll sink in a bit better. So like he said, let's just go ahead and comment this stuff out. I missed having multi-line comments and Zig, by the way. That is something that I'll throw, I've said it before, but I think the reason why Zig doesn't have that is for, compilation speed reasons or something. And like, I'm too much of a a layman when it comes to programming languages and writing compilers and things to really understand whether maybe once you get to a certain project size that really has some serious consequence, you know, whether you've got to parse these multi-line comments or not. But anyway, let's keep going.
Index or something for every entity in the world, right? I am going to go ahead and check to see what's going on with it versus this other guy. Okay, let's see here. Oh, and you know what? Really, that's something that happens inside here. So this is actually the iteration right there that we're looking at. So we've got, let's see, there we go. So we've got that there, and then instead of actually having any of the tile stuff, we're just going to get rid of all that. Let's see there. And then we're going to take a look here, and we're going to...
All right, so this is actually going to open down here. Just make sure I don't nest stuff inside of this loop incorrectly. And this is actually going to go inside of our collision detection iteration loop. Okay, so yeah, for every single entity, we want to do all of this. Every single active entity, I guess. Or high entity. What happened to those asserts? Did he get rid of them? I guess he must have gotten rid of these. Because I don't see him. And that makes sense because this looks like it had to do with the wrapping code. Well, actually, no. I thought he added these asserts to prevent wrapping specifically. He must have just said something about how he was getting rid of them, and I wasn't paying attention.
This other guy. Okay, let's see here. Oh, and you know what? Really, that's something that happens inside here. So this is actually the iteration right there that we're looking at. So we've got, let's see, there we go. So we've got that there, and then instead of actually having any of the tile stuff, we're just going to get rid of all that. Let's see there. And then we're going to take a look here.
Oh, duh, because we don't care about tile stuff anymore. All right, all right. Fair enough. So then all of this goes away too. Is that right? This is such a bold change. Again, I've said this several times on stream before, but I'm not that guy who can just start blasting code away and and maybe it's just because he has a much better idea of where he's going than I do, but I always like to comment stuff out so I can refer back to it. So yeah, it sure looks like we're just going to get rid of this, and then that doesn't explain where he's going to get the test tile position from quite yet, but maybe he'll just pass in the tile coordinates. Well, I guess it'll just, I don't know. I shouldn't think too much about this because he's about to do it all right. Always a fine line between thinking too much about where we're going and then just letting things happen. What's going on here? We want that to be inclusive, is that right? Or less than? Well, it's less than or equal to? Less than, yeah.
And we're going to see what this does in here. So basically what I'm doing is I'm changing this into an iteration over the tile map, and I'm changing it into an iteration over the entities that are active in the region, right? So what I want to do is say, okay, we still have this iteration where we've got to go for each iteration. We've got to see what entities we're going to collide with. For right now, we're going to assume that we can collide with any of them, which again, like I said, is really inefficient, so we don't really want to do that, but we'll deal with that when we go through the second pass. And since all the entities are defined to always be in the same space now, we can kind of get rid of all of this stuff entirely. That's just gone. And now we are basically talking about just having to compute. So the diameter, width, and height is basically going to be pulled off of that other entity, right? So did we pass in? We passed in the entity that we're using. So now we just need to go ahead and get whatever the other entity is. So essentially we want to get the entity here. So we've got an entity, test entity, and that's going to go ahead and grab whatever entity we're on. And so when I grab that test entity, then I'm going to be able to test against its width and height, right? And so that's going to be the dormant version, like so, of our entity, and it's going to be the dormant version of the test entity as well, right? So again, we're doing exactly the same test that we were doing before, only now instead of doing it against a tile, we're doing it against against the other entities. So before we were looping over each tile, now we're looping over each entity. And again, we have widths and heights for the entities, so we'll just use them. That seems pretty easy. And so then all we really need to do now is we need to come up with what we were using before, a relative, basically a relative position relative to, so we got the main coordinate max runner. We just have to have the relative position.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So the entity that gets passed in here is going to be tested against every other entity that is active. And then we'll know the positions. Okay. We'll know the position that the active entity is, that all the active entities are in, because they're all, you know, relative to each other in that space where the entities are active, right? So that makes, and it's all relative to where the camera is, and therefore we don't need to be as concerned. We don't need to be concerned at all, right, is the goal about the greater scope of the whole game world. I think that's right, or at least that's close. So yeah, in here, rather than testing, well, rather than adding the tile side in meters, we're increasing the size of the entity that we're testing against by the entity that we passed in. Okay. Just make sure I didn't leave anything outside of the loop where it's supposed to be in. I've had too many situations where I just kind of like left something in a weird spot. I didn't quite open the loop in the right place, and I spend forever trying to figure out what I left out. Trying to be very meticulous about not making those mistakes on stream, because it's not a fun thing to have to chase down in the first place, never mind when we just want to keep moving forward and focus on the thing we're actually trying to do. And I think that looks fine. I've just got some different names in here, like, well, actually no, where did that rel old player P go? I don't even have that, or did he just add that? Yeah, I don't even think I have that. What is this? I think I just had an extra brace there. Oh, whoops, that's not right. And it's still not right. I have to actually declare this. Test tile P is gone. Right. Okay, we're not there yet. Hold on. I wonder if my chat's broken again. Yeah, it's definitely still broken. I just don't want to sit and try and figure out why it's broken for like an hour, you know, or 2 hours. It could take me so long. I bet just logging out and logging back in would probably fix it. It looked like it was working great until about a week ago. Whatever. Don't worry about it now. Deal with it later.
Relative to, so we got the main coordinate max runner. We just have to have the relative position between the test entity and our entity, and that's obviously very easy to do. That's just the high P and the test entity high P are the two positions. So if I subtract those two, I'm going to get the relative position of the player, right? So I can just directly do that, basically, right? So that's the difference between those two, and that is pretty much all I need to do there.
So he just straight up subtracts them, which is actually pretty nice. That pretty neatly moves us out of the business of dealing with that tile map everywhere, like he's been saying.
We'll think that we'll have to, again, all this stuff is a little sloppy. We'll come back through here, and I just want to kind of get everything laid out and think about it a little bit as we go. So again, looping over all the entities for each iteration of our collision solve, and we're seeing if we hit any of them, and if we do, then we just go ahead and process the collision like we were doing before. Okay, so when we come out of this, we should have a team in just like we had before. We will update that team in by basically saying, okay.
And here, I'm guessing it's kind of the same thing, where we can just say that the new entity position is equal to this result. And that's already looking good. We got the velocity hanging out in there, and then the player delta changes according to the inner product with the wall normal before we update T remaining. The rest of this looks fine so far.
The entity position is going to have added to it whatever that offset was. The velocity will obviously be clipped like we wanted it to be, so that it will no longer have any component if there was a wall that it hit, right? And then the player delta, which is the thing that we're updating by, will also get clipped by it, and we will continue our loop. So that's about all that really needed to happen there. The rest of this stuff can kind of work the same as it was before. This stuff is for going up and down, right? And so I believe what we want to do here is say, okay, when we're doing our collision checking, obviously, inside here, we may find, we basically need now to have some concept of what our collisions actually do, whether or not those collisions are things that actually stop the player, or whether they're collisions that cause something to happen, if that makes sense. So while we are iterating here, right, every time we hit an entity, it would be nice to remember which entity it was that we hit, right? So if I have, for example, an entity or a hit entity index, right? And remember, 0 is the null entity. In fact, I can always start all of my entities iterations at 1. I always forget that we have a null entity. So if I have my hit entity index, assuming that I have a hit entity, it does kind of mean now that we could do something like, okay, if hit entity index, right? If something's going to happen here, we could go ahead and see whether or not whatever that entity was had something that was supposed to happen when we collide with it, right? And I'm not sure exactly what we'd want to do for that, but if we were talking about something that was like a doorway or whatever, we could easily put something in here, right, that says, int32 d abs tile z, right? Again, and this is kind of what I'm doing basically is sticking all of the things that I want into the entity structure for now, and then we'll sort of see how we want to start killing those off a little bit later, right? So like this is for stairs. And I guess we should put stairs in quotes because we don't really know what we want to do for stairs, or rather what they'll actually look like in the game. We don't know if they'll actually be stairs. So all right, so what we could do is say, all right, if we hit an entity index, then is that entity index something that we need to process? Does it do collision response, or does it do some other magical effect, right? And so what we could do is say, another thing we could say here, right, for example, is collides, right, or collides with, I don't know, we'll just call it collides for now, right? And so what we could say is, well, if the test entity, if it collides, right, then we're going to do some testing. But if it doesn't collide, then we won't, right? And so once we do the hit entity index, we know that it is something that does collide, and then we can go ahead in here and say, well, this is where we would process our collision response. And we can sort of save a little bit work here because we know that if we didn't hit any entities, then we know that these things are not in play, right? So we could go ahead and say that we only do this in the case where we actually hit an entity, and otherwise we just break out of our collision loop altogether, right, immediately. So we could do that. I don't know if we want to do that, but we could do it, so we might as well. All right, and so if we hit an entity index, then it might be nice to go ahead and, after we update the player position, see what it actually is that we want to do when we hit this particular entity, right? So when we hit this particular entity, right, we're going to go ahead and get it. So I've got a hit entity here. And then I'm going to say, well, all right, now we don't need to know, we don't need to know most of this other stuff. So we can just go ahead and do whatever that tile stuff was up in here. We don't.
Hold up there, Casey. So the formatting got jumbled up on this. Fix that real quick. Gosh, I should have put in eye drops before starting the stream. It's really cold here now, and so now just my eyes dry out that much faster. But it's not as bad as I was led to believe after getting LASIK almost a year ago. I remember hearing from a lot of people that like the biggest downside to it is that your eyes are just constantly dried out and you got to put in eye drops all the time, and it's really just like once a day for me that I have to do it, which is probably a good thing to do even if you haven't had that surgery. So yeah, if we have a hit entity index greater than 0, then we actually deal with that collision. Then we can start bringing in some of this stuff. Well, let's get the hit entity out. Hit entity index, there we go. And then here, we're gonna pull in, what is this stuff? This right here. Not sure what he's doing about the fact that we don't have a tile value yet, but maybe we'll have to get it out, or I guess it'll just be based off of, excuse me, it'll be based off of the entity's type, right? Like whether it's a wall or a stair. In this case, I guess, yeah, it looks like this is handling stairs, which is why, you know, it makes sense that he was just talking about stairs. And then over here, handling the direction that the entity is facing in. Okay.
Really have to care about this stuff. Let's get rid of that. And then this stuff is updating the facing direction. And this, I think we want to change this to be using the acceleration vector. But we'll just make a note of that. We'll worry about that more when we get to animation. All right, so if I'm doing this and I go ahead and get that hit entity, right, and then I should be able to say, oh.
I see, so all the facing direction stuff. Okay. So rather than whatever the last position the player's velocity was traveling in to affect a change in their direction, we want to use the acceleration. But I guess it's not as simple as just saying, you know, DDP over here. There's something else. Or maybe not.
All right, well, the entity P abs tile Z, so that's going to be in its dormant state, right? His absolute tile Z is going to have to change now. And if I change the entities, the position of the guy, the camera will have to change as well, but that's actually fine. So I think we would move his abs tile Z up. And the only question I have here is how do we want to deal with that with the high entity versus the dormant entity? So I think the problem here, if I may, is really that these coordinates I want to really be kind of three-dimensional, if that makes sense. So I really want these guys to be 3D. Since they aren't right now, I'll go ahead and say that the abs tile Z is actually in here so that I can update the high one. But eventually what we're going to do is we're going to extend these to V3s, which may have to happen relatively soon. I definitely want it to happen before we get to animation, but that's something we'll have to deal with in a moment. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and say, all right, the high entity abs tile Z is going to get plus equaled to whatever this d abs tile Z is here, and that's the entity dormant d abs tile Z, obviously. Oops, wrong way there. And that's how we implement stairs. Now, again, you can sort of start to see, I mean, you can vaguely sort of start to see what we're going to be doing eventually here. You can sort of get the feel for it. After we start piling enough stuff up in here, it'll be like all of the things you ever want to do on collision response would all be in here, right? So you can already see that this is a place that we're going to want to start to focus our attention in terms of starting to support multiple types of entities and that sort of thing, so that we don't have every single possible thing that could possibly be in an entity getting stored and getting processed and all that stuff, right? So you can sort of see how things will sort of start to indicate to us how we need to start to break down the architecture. But at this point, obviously, it's totally fine. But you can kind of see it already starting. This is where we'll have a bunch of data, and we'll want to start to marshal that data, sort of keep it under control in different ways. And so that'll be very interesting when we get to that as well.
I do not understand. The dormant entities, oh, P, right? Oh, yeah. Now we got mismatched types. I thought I made this, oh yeah, I did make this an int. I made it an int, and then I made it U32, and then I made it back to an int. But that makes sense because all of these, you know, absolute tiles, absolute tile indices are U32s. Okay.
Under control in different ways. And so that'll be very interesting when we get to that as well. But we're not there yet. So anyway, that's right. I forgot we have to pass, at least at the moment, we're passing what kind of entity resolution we want for things. So for now, we're doing it this way. But we're going to have to do some other, we'll do some other interesting things. I messed this up right here.
I just noticed. First of all, we need to start off at the first index instead of the 0th, because the 0th is the null entity. And we don't have a test entity yet, so we need to, well, thanks NeoVim for doing a lovely and terrible job of formatting that for me. I think that's right now.
So for now, we're doing it this way, but we're going to have to do some other, we'll do some other interesting things. We might even get to that today, we'll see.
Holy crap, he has so many errors. Do I have that many errors? Hit entity was not used. There's no way that's my only error. I think what I'm going to start doing is silencing these vet errors during stream and then just turn them back on when I... Basically what I do is when I finish a day's code, I go and just kind of skim the code that was changed and I make sure that it's good before committing it. But this kind of just slows me down on stream having these. They're good to have when I'm like finalizing the code, right? And I want to commit a change, but yeah, I mean, I don't even know if, let's see, unused, yeah, just silencing all the unused stuff would probably be good. Wow, I can't believe that that didn't blow up. Sweet, so I can just get rid of that now. And then I just have to remember to stash that change to the build script every time I want to, and then recompile, make sure that I didn't leave any unused stuff hanging around, because I don't like seeing that, right? And that's why I have that flag. That's why I like to use it. But when I'm just flying around and making changes, it just kind of slows me down.
So let's see here. We have our entity, and that's obviously supposed to be that in the high P. All of these are entity high data. There we go. Entity high, right, and so on. And that all looks good. Oops, that doesn't look good. And this also has to have that same guy. We obviously want to get the entity at high resolution. Although actually we only really need them at dormant, now that I think about it, because we're not actually doing, oh no, we were doing the, no, we're just doing the, yeah, we were just doing the dormant access, so we can just get them at dormant level. All right, so let's see what else happens here.
I guess I did not see that. The residency thing is still a bit tricky for me to internalize, I guess. Like, I'm trying to create a mental model for this. It's definitely sinking in better this time around, and I would hope so, since it's the second time doing it. But like, what does it matter? You know, what does it matter whether we get it at a dormant, you know, get the dormant entity versus the high entity, if what we're going to do here is just pull it out of whatever its index is, right? What does it really matter then? It just feels like it's not doing a whole lot. Like, where else are we using this? This makes sense, because if the entity doesn't exist, right, then we don't want to do something with it. Same thing here. And I guess, let me go back here. I see. So I guess I forgot that this was happening. We're implicitly, behind the scenes, we are changing its residence when we do this. But, and maybe he's going to run into a problem with this, because when we do that, we're going to say that that entity that we just collided with is dormant now. And it's still within range of the player, right? So, I don't know. I'm just trying to think through this and not just copy it to get through it. Again, trying to walk that line between internalizing what is going on and just, going with it.
These are just ones that have to be changed to entity.high again, right? Oops, entity with entity.high. So that's just changing it like that. Okay, and there we go. Oh, wow, that compiled the whole thing. I was expecting more of a fuss than that. I guess not. Okay, so we have a ton of work to do still because we haven't really done all the stuff that we need to do. So, for example, change entity residence has not been implemented yet, right? And so you can see we were trying to initialize the player and bring him in there. We haven't done that. We haven't actually put any of the walls into the entity list. So stuff's a little banana cakes right now and not in a particularly good setup whatsoever. So what we need to do first is say, all right, when we do change entity residence, we have to take a look and see what is going on with the entity. Right now, we actually only have one thing that we really need to handle, or I should say two state transitions we need to handle, which is basically if the residence equals high, right, then we need to move him from dormant to high if he was currently dormant, or rather just not in high. Else, if the residence equals entity residence low, that means we're moving him out, right? That's really all we really needed to do. So what we can do here is say, all right, if the entity residence equals entity high, or sorry, is not equal to entity high, then we know that we have to do the move. Otherwise, we don't have to do anything because he's already resident in the place that we want him to be. And if the residence here is not equal to low, then the same is true. But or I shouldn't say low. It's actually dormant that we care about here. And then I guess we'll say, well, I guess it's really if it's equal to anything else at the moment. We'd have to think about what would happen with when we start to have something actually in low. But at the moment, everything's actually in the dormant. And I wonder if maybe low entities maybe just wouldn't have hardly anything else in them. So it may look more like if the residence either it's high and it wasn't high, so it has to move to high, or it is anything and was going to be high previously, right? So it was. It was anything if the residence was already equal to high, I guess we could say. So if it's high and it wasn't high, then we need to make it high by translating it up into the camera space. So map the entity into camera space, and if it was something other than high, and we want, and it was if it was high and we want it to be something other than high, then we need to map it the entity back into tile space, like so, right? So yeah, so that's really all we need to do there. Pretty straightforward. Okay. And I can already think about I'm already thinking of some things that I want to do that we, or at least that we're going to have to think about that I don't quite have captured here. Like the thing that I'm thinking about in my head is, what if you almost want it so that you can ask for either one of these, and it's almost more like a caching system, if that makes sense. Like I'm thinking about it and I'm going like, I don't really want to have to worry about what state it's in so much as I want to just be able to ask for one of these types of data. So if I was computing in tile map space, I could ask for the dormant entity and guarantee that that would be a valid position for him, even if he was currently high, because it would do the reverse mapping at the time that I asked if it was fail. You know what I mean? So it's a little confusing. So I got to think that through. Or I might just do it so that I always map them back immediately after. Like another thing we could do, right, is that when we do the move player, at the end, we always just do the reverse mapping just at the end of that move player. So we could always just update it up here. So every time we move somebody, we update them just at the end. So that way it's all in float, but you always write back a valid tile position at the end. You know, that could be kind of interesting too. Always write back a valid tile position. Right, because then everyone who wants to execute slowly on dormant or low entities can, and anyone who wants to go on highs could as well. It's kind of compelling. Kind of compelling. You know what I'm saying to you? So it'd basically just be, we would have no more concept of recanonicalize either. We'd just have a thing that flat out maps by doing it directly. Yeah, I think that sounds really good to me. Right, because you can see how that works. Basically, everything happens on high entities, and they just get pushed down to the dormant entities, right? And then you know that the dormant entities are also always valid. So you don't have to worry about the fact that something wouldn't have a P that was valid. So I think that's, yeah, I like that. I like that. I like that a lot. And so basically, what that means to me as well is like the change entity residence, right, is only going to really do this case, right? It never has to map it out. At all. This change entity residence will become mostly about just managing the actual lists of entities, and it won't really be very much about doing those mappings. The only time it will do a mapping for us is when it needs to generate the high entity out of the dormant one, right? So that's kind of cool. I like where this is going. I'm already liking this. And again, I just want to kind of point this out. I've said it a billion times. I'm just going to say it again. That's the reason why I code this way, is because I never would have thought of all of these things correctly, right? I just never would have. I need to go through them and see how they work and then come up with them. And so I try very hard to structure my programming technique around being able to iterate on a number of little design ideas like this. And then when I know that I've got one that's good, then I blow that out into the full design, right? And that just saves a tremendous amount of time over trying to pre-design everything up front, where I will always be wrong, and I kind of feel like everyone I've ever seen do it is also wrong. I don't think it's like just me. And so,
You know, I do this myself. Obviously, very different domain in web programming, but and 9 times out of 10, I'm writing something in Elixir. And I know what the problem is that I need to solve, but I have no clue how that should look like or how many different things it'll need to interact with, particularly because the code base that I'm working on now has gotten pretty big and there's just so many moving parts that I don't know what everything, not even, like, what it should look like is irrelevant. I have no idea what the end result is going to be until I've actually broken things considerably and then fixed them and then looked at like basically all of the dependencies of this change I'm making, like all of the effects, all of the cascading effects that it has. And sometimes even months and months later, I don't detect it. So like I'm trying to think, I just never worked in a situation. I've never, like even when I was in school, they didn't tell you to try and think about a perfect code design up front. Not that I can remember. But I can only imagine how painful that would be, right?
Just trying it first and doing it that way is much better. Because remember, it doesn't take that long. We only spend a few hours doing this sort of stuff. If you count up the amount of time we spend doing it on the stream, any given thing that we're prototyping is usually only 2-3 hours at max, right? And so if you think about how little time that is to invest towards exploring and figuring out what your architecture should be, it's so easy. I mean, people spend that long just drawing diagrams, right? That are not useful. And so playing around with code is just a really good idea, I think, for figuring out how something should be designed. So I guess what I want to do here is I want to calc the p. So what I want to do is I want to say that the entity dormant p equals map, map into tile space or something like this, right? And then what I do is I would pass the camera that we're using currently, and so that's this guy right here, right? So this is the base point. So yeah, so game state camera p. So that's the base point, and then my entity high p is my current point, and I'll just trust that that will always generate, a valid sort of position there, right? And that way I know that those will always be valid as well, and that'll be pretty free to do. It's like 2 divides or something like that per entity, and we're already doing so much work, obviously, to update entities that I don't think that'll be particularly relevant. Okay, so if we go ahead and do that, I mean, I really like typing doormat, by the way. So now we've gotten rid of recanonicalize, right? It's gone, and our recanonicalize function is just going to be that mapping function, right? So in fact, we can even just kind of lean on the one we have already. So map into tile space, right? This function is now just going to be this, right? So we're going to have to pass that tile map. Oops, tile map. That's just going to be mapped into tile space, right? Oops, not that one. Mapped into tile space. And all we really have to do is say, okay, we've got that base position, and then we've got an offset, right? And that's really easy because we already essentially wrote this function. All we really have to do is we don't even have to do the work, right? All we really have to do is just that, I think, right? So basically we take that base position, we treat it as if we had updated it, and then we go in here. And by the way, I think these were busted, right? Remember, we didn't really need those. If I remember correctly, that was just a garbage thing that we'd done because we had forgot to call recanonicalize or something like this. I don't know, there was some nastiness going on.
Yes, the recanonicalized too late bug. The one time I thought Casey did something wrong, and it actually turned out that I was right. Every other time, I was like, I think he did something wrong here, and then, nope, I was wrong. All right, so let's just go ahead and check out that tile code. And then down here somewhere. That's right, this was one of those cases where maybe it would have been nice to use a procedure group. But instead, I just went with recanonicalized coordinate, which is what he called both of those. Well, actually, he called it this right, but basically the same thing. And then I had this other one, recanonicalized position, but this will be our map into tile space procedure. And then it takes in the tile map still, and it also takes in that offset, that's right. And I don't know why I have this as test pose. Base pose is what he called it, which makes more sense to me. That's just some cruft that got left in there. And then we update this. And it would be that simple, but there is no offset here. So what gives? If I look at this, oh, it's because it's called offset with a trailing underscore. Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
On there, so we're gonna get rid of that for now as well. All right, so let's go ahead and...
And that's right, yeah, I didn't even change this here. There we go.
And see if we've got this correctly. Not a member of tile map, right, it's the offset there. And recanonicalize position, we don't care about this anymore. Let's see, and ooh, that isn't, it isn't? It isn't, that's right, it's not, it's world. There we go.
I guess I did not catch that. That is that, and is this a pointer? It is, okay. What about this? Does this take a pointer? I guess it would be yelling at me if it did. Cool. And then this here, yeah. That's nice. Get to wipe out a whole procedure with this change.
So let's do that. And I guess that's pointer as well. All right, so that is that. Now, what should happen, I guess, at the moment is we should, okay, we still have one more thing to implement, and that is the change entity residence function. That has to go ahead and actually map things into entity space, into the camera space. So wherever that camera P is, right, what we need to do is say, we need to do that difference, that tile difference that we were doing before. Right, here we go, let's see, tile map difference. We need to do this guy, so we gotta take that difference. Where is that function? It is subtract. And so we are going to subtract the entity position, and that's the dormant position, from wherever the camera is at the moment, and that is going to be where the entity now resides. All right.
All right. Just want to think carefully about this because I actually do not have that since I jumped ahead and made V3. Made it. I declared it by just typing in what, where is that, V3. I actually guess I don't know where that is. Is that in here? Where did I declare these? Oh, in math. But anyway, that's all I did. Because it was so straightforward that there was no way that I could possibly mess that up. So it should just be as simple as this. And then we get a diff out like that. And we got to do something with it.
So, oh, and that needs the tile map. So let's see, we just did a ton of stuff. I feel the need at the moment to kind of step through here and kind of get our bearings a little bit. These are addresses. There we go. So
what is this? Is that... Okay, that is a tile map position. Which is this? I mean, yeah, okay. So how is this working before? Man, I go and say that there's no way that that could possibly screw me up because it was so straightforward, and now I'm screwing myself up. So it's complaining because... Oh, I think I got mixed up. We do call subtract because we have to work off of the, yeah, it's this right here. It's the result that is not this tile map difference thing that he's come up with, and is just a V3. Can't quite, you know, do it that neatly. But it's all good. And like Casey just said, these, oh gosh, why did that happen? Why did this happen? Oh, because I'm in the wrong file. Okay. What? Declared not used. I don't care. Is this because I didn't update my build game script? Yeah, I guess I gotta change this too. Is it because of this strict style flag? I don't get it. Why is it barking at me about this? Huh. I'll worry about that later.
That diff now needs to have our entity hi, has to get initialized. So what have we got here? Well, oops. Well, our entity hi now has to...
In fact, aren't I not using... Yeah, I'm not using this, am I? Tile map. I could use it here, but it's not being used anywhere else, and it's not complaining about this not being used. Is it because it's the result of a procedure call? Whatever.
Have a p, which is just going to be that diff, right? So that's the xy. Our entity hi dp is going to be nothing. We'll just assume he has no velocity at start, which may be something we want to change in the future, but we're not sure. Its abs tile z is just going to be whatever its z actually was, right? So that's going to be abs tile z there. And its facing direction is just going to be 0, I guess. We'll assume that gets updated at some point. What was the actual name for that? dxy. So, all right. So let's see what's going on now, because we've made so many changes at this point. Oops, dev env. MSDev was the old name. They changed it to dev env. Don't ask me why. Nobody knows. So let's take a look at what's going on here, because who has any idea at this point what's going on? So what we would want to start with is we want to start with the point where a player actually becomes active, right? So I hit the space bar, and we're going to add an entity. We go through here.
Hey there, Max. Thanks for dropping by the stream. I'm sorry I didn't see your message sooner. If you dropped that in a while back, my chat is broken, so I only see it when I'm looking at when I have Casey's screen up here, and I don't see it, you know, if I'm working on the code over here. So yeah, I really have to fix that. It's got to go on the to-do list. In fact, that's how I'll remember. Let me just update my list of to-dos here. Where did my to-dos go? There they are. I've got like 10 things on here. Fix chat in OBS. Some days I'll get like 3 things done, and then 2 will be added. And it's just never ending. Howdy, devil. Okay, so I guess I should make sure that mine works now. We won't get that unused error, so we're good. I don't know if the player is supposed to be showing up at this point if I press space, but it looks like nothing happens. But I don't know if we're supposed to be back to working order yet. I suspect not quite. But yeah, this is kind of strange that the compiler was forcing us to do something with that diff variable, even though I had the flags switched off. I mean, it did work over here. There's probably just some subtlety here that I'm missing. Where did that go? Move player. I guess I should just go ahead and get rid of that. But yeah. Maybe I should add that to the to-do list. Figure out why that is barking at me. I feel like it shouldn't be. Oh well.
It's going to be entity 1, which is correct. That's what we want. I would like to turn hexadecimal off, please. Thank you. And that's going to go.
Max said, I just got here and I want to know what you are trying to do. That's a great question. I don't even fully know the answer to that question. I'm just kind of going on a explorative journey here. We're on rails right now with Casey as he instructs me on basically making a game from scratch, right? And that is including like building all the engine components in Scratch, right? And he's doing it in C and C++, the C and C++ programming languages. He's kind of using like a C-styled C++. And I'm kind of porting his code over to Odin, the Odin programming language, and trying to basically bridge the gap in my understanding, because rotely copying him is not enough, right? Like you can sit here and copy the code he's writing all day, but if you don't take the time to understand why he's actually doing the things he's doing, you're not going to actually learn any lessons. And so I'm doing that in the hopes that at some point I'll feel comfortable and confident enough to go off on my own and start prototyping my own really modest game ideas. You know, I have ambitions, right? Part of what I'm doing here is trying to be very ambitious and maybe make, I don't know, a 10-hour game someday that's actually interesting and worth playing from start to finish. But it's a long road to get there. So hopefully that answers your question. But we're basically just getting started. And you know, Casey gets the question a lot of like, why would you do any of this? Why would you do this without, you know, just using a prefabbed engine or whatever? And surely, like, if you just wanted to hit the ground running and start making a game, that would probably be the saner thing to do. But and I've said this multiple times here on stream, is I like programming, I like learning new things, and there's a ton to learn here that is not just specific to games, but just programming related, right? Like I've always been interested in lower level programming, but I've never had the opportunity to get into it through what I do for work. And so it's been a rewarding experience just on its own. Just doing it for its own sake, really, it is kind of fun. Regardless of, maybe I get to a point where I'm like, okay, the odds of me completing a game that anybody wants to play are so low. At least, not even, that's not even the right like way to qualify it. I wouldn't say that I want to make a game specifically that for the reason that I want other people to get enjoyment out of it. That would be a good outcome, to be sure, but I want to make a game that is worth making ultimately. I think that's what my goal is here, and also to determine whether or not I can actually do that, whether I have the capacity for that, because it may just be that I wind up noodling with different graphics stuff at some point, and then I don't ever actually make a game, which is an outcome that isn't exactly uncommon. But I am keeping an open mind here, because like I said at the beginning of this whole little rambling speech, I don't know where this goes, right? I just know that I'm doing something fun for me, and I've wanted to get out of my comfort zone, partially with doing this, but also doing it on stream is it's really strange. I say that over and over again while I'm doing this, how strange it is, what, you know, the format of the stream, what it is I'm trying to do, all these things. But I feel like I'm being pulled towards something, and it's hard to really give a more concrete answer than that. You can have it in the future if you want. Yeah, if I keep working towards it, right, that's a good goal to have. For me, I think it'd be fun to just, if there's anybody that I actually want to get enjoyment out of a game that I make, however small in scope it may be, it would be to like watch my kids play a game that I've made. There's just something about that, and also like using their feedback to add things into the game, you know, and then see how that excites them. Like there's just something about that I think would be really, really fun and cool to do. So anyway,
ahead and clear all of the stuff out, which is fine. And we're going to send it to dormant, and that's about it. Then we're going to initialize the player, so we're going to go ahead and get that entity. And let's see here, we got all of the versions of it, even though it's technically still dormant. That's okay, because we're not actually doing any kind of compression with that yet. We're going to set where we think that it is. And, you know, we haven't actually set, did we actually, I guess we did set the camera position as well. So then we're going to call change entity residence. So we come up here, we say if the residence equals high, which it does in this case, but it wasn't equal to high before, then we need to do our initialization of the high entity. So let's take a look. Where is that? It's -9, -1. Those are relatively reasonable values, I would think. We're going to set that abs tile to wherever it was, facing direction. So we've done that. And since there was nothing else, we're going to set the camera to follow. And we're going to have to go. We have to go update that camera follow code because I don't think we ever actually did that. All right, so that's all we did there. And then we should be able to kind of we'll step through it a little bit more and see. All right, so when we're doing this rel row rel column nonsense now, so this stuff is going to go away as well. I think in a second here we'll find out. So let me skip through here. Anything that's entity residence high, which is the first one and the second one, neither of them were. Oh, did we forget? You know what? I think we forgot to actually ever set the residence. Change entity residence. So what we need to do at the end of this is say entity residence equals residence. So otherwise it'll never get marked as high, which is not what we want. Okay, so let's try that one more time. See what happens. So we want.
Such a simple change, and somehow I messed it up. What is this? Cannot assign. Oh. Huh. Did he make this a pointer? He didn't. So in that case is, oh, he does that outside of the conditional here. Maybe he meant for that to be a pointer, and he's about to see that that's what he meant to do, and because it's not actually going to change the entity, right? Like it's going to change a copy of it. And that means that where we're calling this, that needs to be a pointer. I think that's right. It sure seems right to me. Still can't beam in, but we'll see. I still don't know if we're quite there.
So otherwise it'll never get marked as high, which is not what we want. Okay, so let's try that one more time. Let's see what happens. So we want to go down here to there, and let's see what happens here. So if we do this, and I hit the space bar, I am still not even triggering a breakpoint. So why is that the case? Did we or did we not add an entity? I guess we did not add an entity somehow. So let's find out. Let's, oh, right. Oh, that was funny. That was funny. Yeah. If that doesn't change the entity residence, that's just a note of what the residence is. We actually need to do it here, right? That's actually where we need to change the actual entity residence. So I'm guessing that really what we want to do for that is that that should probably be, we would put that in the dormant part after, I suspect, because there's really no need for having an extra one here since we always have to have the rest of the entity data, but...
Okay, I get it. I came to the wrong conclusion, which is good. That's a learning experience right there. So we're not changing the pointer here. Well, maybe we will. What the hell did I do there? What on earth happened? Oh, okay. I didn't realize this was the same function I was writing in. Sorry, I said function, I meant procedure. So game state, entity residence at this entity index, but we don't have the index, right? Like that's the thing that we want to change. There's some index where this entity resides, and that's what we want to update. But I would have thought that changing the pointer would have accomplished the same thing because it just points at that entity, right? Maybe, well, actually, I guess not, because, yeah, because that's just a wrapper, right? This type right here, this here does not persist anywhere. It's the values here do, right? But this does not. So, okay, that does make sense. That was the wrong thing.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, well, so there's a couple things we need to do. So let's do them both. So first of all, let's change this so that when we do the change entity residence, we'll actually just do this. In fact, you know what? We don't even really need change entity residence to do that, really, right? This is actually going to be here, and this could actually be something that's just taking the uint32 of the entity index. So this is going to go ahead and say that entity residence, like so, is of the entity index equals the residence, right? And then this entity high, it's only going to probably ever have to, well, no, I guess it needs to do the rest of it too, but that's just going to go ahead and do these two. So in the case where these are here, we have the high entity equals game state high entities, entity index, there we go, and the dormant entity,
Let me see if I can both catch up with him here and get to where he's already going. So in here, rather than passing in the whole entity, this gets the index now. And should that be a U32? Does it really matter? I guess we'll find out. And then over here, we get the entity out at each residency. It's just weird to like even think about where, what vocabulary I'm even supposed to use here, because it's the same entity, but it exists both in a dormant fashion and an active fashion and a not as active fashion, right? We got high, low, dormant. And it like implies that they're different, but at the same index in each array, they are all the same entity. It's just a different representation of them. It's like, you know, I have a social security number somewhere, but then like me, the physical person, I have like, you know, dark hair and brown eyes, that sort of thing. It's probably not a great way to think about it, but and I don't think we actually do anything with the low entity, so this should actually just be dormant entities, and we actually want the reference to it. Oh, and this is going to have to go out here. What is that formatting, dude? That is so messed up. Still complaining. Well, oh yeah. Maybe we're just gonna have to get rid of this because, yeah, I don't know what's gonna happen with this conditional, so I'm just gonna comment that out so the error doesn't bother me anymore. And then over here, we can do a bit of this. And a little bit of that. Okay. And then over here, that's where we set the residence. So at this point, I think what Casey would be expecting is that our little player is going to show up finally. I guess on this right here, you would check the entity residence to see if it's not already high. Let's just go for it and see if that's right. At that entity index, right?
game state, from entities, entity index. All right, so we've got those. That's all happy. We'll change this to look like that.
Oh, dang it. I did not... I hate when I do this. I did not show the code I was changing. All I was changing here was this right here. Doing exactly what he was doing. But I'm kind of forecasting that... See, like right here, he still has this conditional in place where he's checking the entity that was originally being passed in, but now we're passing in the index. So now I figure we have to actually check the residence that's stored. But maybe I'm wrong about that. Or actually, yeah. Because this is the residence we want to pass in. And we want to set the entity at this index to be active. And then over here, we basically check if it's not already. So actually, yeah, this should be inside of here. Once again, the formatting screwed me over. In fact, I might as well just see if it works. Oh my goodness, we're back. Except we can't go up the stairs. We're really stuck in this room forever. Oh gosh, yeah, that's not good. Well, we have some things. Hopefully, oh man, I'm really hoping that Casey has this issue too, but we'll see. But at least we can spawn in again and glide around. There's that. Let's see here. Yeah, sorry about that. I try to remember all the things. I wish I had like some kind of light in front of me that told me which screen I was on. I think I would need to get, what is it? It's a stream deck or something. Isn't there a company that sells one of those where like it'll have a light that shows me which scene I'm on? So that way, like just by looking at it, I know which scene I'm on, and I can also press the button for the scene that I want to be on, right? Because I've got all these different screens that I'm on depending on what we're focusing on. But anyway, can I know which programming language you know? Well, I know, I can tell you the languages I've written professionally, and that includes Python, Ruby, Elixir, JavaScript, well, actually quite a bit of JavaScript. That might be it, actually. Trying to remember. Oh, I've written a bit of PHP a long time ago. I think that might be it. Yeah, I think that's it. If I can remember another one, I'll let you know.
Like that. Okay. So that'll do that, and I'm just going to have get entity say if the residence that you requested is less than the residence, or sorry, is greater than the residence that the entity currently is, right? Then it'll do that change. So the first thing it'll do is say, okay, here, yeah, because this is garbage. In fact, what this is doing, this is not actually what it should be doing, right? Because this was just filling in whatever the residence was. What we really want to do is say if what we were currently residing at, right? If the current residence, like so, if the current place that we are residing is not where we want to reside, right? So if it's less than, then we need to do that change entity residence, right? To make sure that it's not anymore. And then we can know that it is, so we could assert here that it was, right? That these are equal after the fact, right? Or I shouldn't say equal. The entity residence is at least greater than or equal to, because really we could allow that function, that change residence, to change you at its discretion to a higher level of residence. We just don't want it to change you to a lower level of residence.
We'll see if I can actually do that the way that I've written this, but I actually noticed that earlier on, right, in the stream, and that kind of makes me feel good about myself. I was looking at this and I was like, I don't think this is doing what Casey wants it to be doing, and turns out I was right, but maybe not for the right reasons. I don't know. I'd have to go back and check it to see if what I was saying at, you know, an hour ago or whenever that was even intelligible or not. But here we go. We're fixing it now. And then we assert that the game state entity residency at this index is greater than or equal to this, and I don't know if that'll actually work. It does. That's interesting. So I guess under the hood, you know, this is giving us some integer value, right? High is like implicitly, it's implicitly got a value of 1, but that begs the question of whether I have these in the right order, and I don't know that I do. Yeah, I don't. See, that could be a bug right there. If I actually, yeah. No, because we want to go from like least existing to most existing, for lack of a better way of putting it. Either we don't exist at all, we're dormant, we're, you know, low frequency, or we're high frequency. Okay.
So that's what that does, right? Okay. So all we really need to do now is figure out where is that residence again. That residence is here. So what we need to say is if the entity residence as it exists is not equal to high, then there we go. And let's see, change entity residence. This takes an empty index now. Yeah. And there's some stuff I don't like about that. Too many indexes versus struct thing. So we're going to have to look at that a little bit more, but doesn't really matter at the moment. Okay, so that should be now, I think, changing it so that we actually have an entity. Okay, we do. And let's take a look at what that entity actually looks like. Hi.
Well, I definitely missed a change that he made there, but I wonder if... Yeah, what was that change? Oh, I see. He was just fixing some compiler errors. And yeah, he actually did the same exact thing that I did. So I think now he'll be in the same place where I'll be, which is that, you know, we can spawn the guy, but he's going to clip right past these walls as if they don't exist. And maybe that's just because we haven't added them as actual entities yet. In fact, I'm willing to bet that's the issue, because all we've done is like store tile values or whatever for these things, but we haven't actually added any entities other than the player. So I think that's what's going on here.
Equal to high, then there we go. And let's see, change entity residence. This takes an empty index now. Yeah. And there's some stuff I don't like about that. Too many indexes versus struct thing. So we're going to have to look at that a little bit more, but doesn't really matter at the moment. Okay, so that should be now, I think, changing it so that we actually have an entity. Okay, we do. And let's take a look at what that entity actually looks like. High entity, low entity, dormant entity, right? And here they are. So there's the offset of the guy. Here's his facing direction. Let's see what happens here. There he is. He's moving around. Now he should be able to walk straight through walls, which is true, because of course we're not adding those entities yet, right? Now if I add another guy, I feel like maybe they would collide now potentially. Maybe not. No. So I would like to. I'd like to go see why that isn't. So that I think should be working. So let's debug that, because that is the one collision that I do think should probably work. So let's take.
I'm guessing it's because he never sets the collides on the dormant entity, right? Yeah, there's no other allusion to this notion of colliding. So if we go to initialize player, and then change that over here to be true, that may just work. In fact, I actually, well, we'll see, because he'll make the change to see if that's true, but I actually don't have my other controller in here, so I can't spawn in my second dude.
So what should be happening is when we do our collision iterations here, right, we should be testing with, oh, you know what else we kind of need to do as well? We need to make sure we don't collide with ourselves. Let me do that first as well. Why do I keep closing the app? I have to remember to stop closing the app. I never need to close the app. I need to fix the thing that I was working on at work so that it has the hot reloading as well, so I just get used to never having to close apps anymore. You should never really have to close them. All right, so what I want to do is say, don't use the index that we are, right? So, you know, and that's pretty easy. I could just test the pointer as well. So I could just say, all right, you know, basically, if test entity.high is not equal to entity.high, something like this, right? That'd be a pretty trivial way to avoid testing against oneself. All right, so off we go, and keep that guy going there. Let's move this guy over here, right? And this I assert should be colliding. It isn't, so I think that's just a bug, right? So I want to see and make sure that we're actually, okay, so the first time through, we wouldn't try to collide with that guy because it's us. The next time through, there we go. It is not set to collide. That would be it. So when we add a player, we want to say...
I was right like 3 times in a row just now. Or maybe just twice. Maybe I'm I'm getting overexcited and it was just 2 times in a row. But still, that's better than usual, right? That's a good sign.
Collides is true, right? And now maybe they will collide. I don't know. Hard to say. Very hard to say, in fact. Off we go. There we go. And so we'll move this guy in here and see what happens if they collide. They do, in fact, collide. Yes. Although it doesn't quite skate properly. So we still have some bugs in there. Again, the collision detector is pretty bad at this point, so it's really not that big of a deal, but that should not be happening, I don't believe. So we should go double check what's going on in there. I think that might just be, again, with the, I don't know if that's more with the epsilon issues and so on, because like we haven't really done a good job making our collision detector do anything that you would want it to normally do to keep things robust or good. We only did like the very bare minimum. So, you know, if this was something a little more conservative here.
So it looks like he's going to go in and mess with that epsilon, but I saw another message pop in over here. Max Genius said, I see you are using Visual Studio Code. Actually, I am not. Whoops. This is NeoVim inside of WesTerm, the WesTerm terminal emulator. So to make that explicit, I use what window am I on? I use WesTerm as my terminal emulator, and I use NeoVim as my editor. But I used to use VS Code. I switched to NeoVim maybe going on 2 years ago. Well, actually, that's not true. I think I started using, so I used to use VS Code, and at one point I started getting a hankering to learn Vim, so I started using Vim motions or Vim bindings in VS Code, like whatever that Vim, you know, that basic Vim plugin is on VS Code, and then I completely swapped over to NeoVim because I got tired of VS Code just being so much. It's just so much. There's so much going on the screen at all times, seemingly, and I just wanted to go like as minimalistic as possible, and Vim just kind of allows me to do that. But you know, I worked fine with VS Code for years, so I don't really care. I know some people really, you know, get up in arms about what editor to use, but I've just constantly drifted in the direction that felt right to me at the time. And sometimes I start to feel sluggish with the tools that I'm using, and when I get to that point, I just kind of like reevaluate the tools that I'm using. And then this was a big kind of painful change to make off of VS Code at first, but now it just feels so normal that I don't even think about it. But I actually entertained the idea of going back to VS Code because I know I can get a debugger working in VS Code with Odin. So what may happen is that I just wind up using VS Code as a debugger at some point, and I keep using NeoVim to like actually edit the code, kind of the way Casey does. He edits in Emacs, but then he uses he uses Microsoft Visual Studio as his debugger. So it'd be maybe a setup a little bit like that. But I'm just so I'm not super particular about these things, but it would just annoy me to have to swap back and forth the way that he has to use a debugger. Like I could get used to it just fine. It works fine for him, obviously. But it would be nice if I could have that set up with NeoVim and not have to switch back and forth. And it was for that reason that I was like, well, maybe I'll just go all the way back to VS Code, you know, just make the full circle. But we'll see. I still haven't even bothered to set up a debugger with Odin. So that's something I should look at doing. And then at that point, I'll probably make another decision about my editor. But anyway. So, yeah, let's go back over here and reduce that epsilon. I guess Casey's probably going to mess with it a bunch here. So maybe there's no point in...
I wonder if that would also keep us out of the woods until we actually go ahead and make a real collision detector. But let's see. Yeah, so the sticking is definitely not right. But at least you don't get epsilon trapped anymore. Yeah. So what's going on with our sticking? What is the problem? Did I inadvertently muck up the code when I came in here? So assuming that I hit an entity, if I didn't hit an entity, oh, do I ever actually set that? Of course not. Duh. All right, so that's our only problem. Hit entity index has to be equal to whatever the entity index was, right? That we actually.
Well, that is a problem. Yeah, I should have noticed that. He has an excuse because he's actually explaining all this stuff as he does it, right? What is that index variable? Yeah, it's just the entity index. He has an excuse to miss something like that, but I don't. You know, if I was really understanding what was going on, I would have caught that and been like, hey, you know, we instantiate it, we declare it, and then we do the test here to actually do the collision detection, but then we never actually were setting this. So there you go.
Hit. So there we.
Ismail said, I'm a big man, I just can't talk. I'm a big Emacs fan myself. Yeah, I actually use, what was it? I tried out Doom Emacs for a solid couple months, and I really liked it. And that was part of what motivated me to swap over to NeoVim, because I wanted an experience similar to that, but I wanted to be able to easily recreate it on any OS. And that was my problem. Like, VS Code worked on both Mac and Windows, and I had to work on both of those quite a bit. But Doom Emacs was less easy. In fact, I don't think I ever got Doom Emacs set up on my MacBook. I never got it working quite right. But when I had it working on my Windows machine, on, like, you know, what was it, WSL, that was a pretty good experience. But then I swapped over to NeoVim, and it just works. I don't even need to use WSL or anything for anything. And I actually did try vanilla Emacs way back. I think it was when I first discovered Handmade Hero, literally almost 10 years ago, at least 8 years ago or something like that. And I saw that he was using Emacs, and I was like, oh, I'll just, you know, I'll do the same thing. He seems like he's pretty good with his editor. I'll just start learning Emacs. And the key bindings were so painful for me because I was just starting to learn how to code at all at that point. And it was just something that I didn't stick with very long. But some days I wish I had, because it would be nice to have a really good Emacs experience on every machine. But Emacs, it's kind of the same thing with Doom Emacs and regular Emacs, where you just get into these weird, you know, different platform issues, and it's like, I just don't want to spend all of my time figuring out why my editor won't do what I want it to do, you know? And NeoVim has been like the sweet spot, but I'm always on the lookout for something different, so maybe I'll try something else at some point. For sure, Emacs is a bit weird, but your setup looks great on NVim right now. Well, I appreciate that, Ishmael. It's nice of you to say. I really didn't put too much effort into it. I think I probably spent like a week or two. But basically what I did is I just stripped out pretty much anything extra. Like line numbers, who needs them? Where we're going, we don't need line numbers. That sort of thing. Indentation, whatever. I can do this. That's my indentation. You know what I mean? If something looks off, I'll catch it. Although sometimes I actually don't catch it. So anyway, editor talk. It's fun, but we gotta keep moving.
There we go. That's really all we needed. We weren't actually ever processing that case. So yeah, of course, this is actually stuck in the guy now. That's pretty funny. Well, that's actually not that big of a deal to fix, right? I can just do this, right? conditional expression is constant. I know. Well, if entity index equals 0. There we go. Now I can get out, right? And then, yeah, I may have to fix the collision detector. It's bugging me enough that it's not robust enough yet that it's already bugging me a little. But okay, at least now gliding is working properly. So we can at least get that roughly okay. I hate leaving things broken, but sometimes I know that it's better to leave them broken when you're not trying to actually ship them. You may just be wasting time, and so it's good to not do that sometimes, and I can appreciate that. Anyway, so that's good. That guy's colliding properly, so that's nice. And so now let's think about what else we need to do. So we've done our mapping, and everything is now happening in float space, which is good. That's all very nice. But we also now let's start to look at what we have to do for the world itself and also for moving the camera. So like let's try to put doors in there. Let's try to put stairs in the walls and that sort of stuff, right? Because we haven't done that yet. So assuming that whatever the camera following entity is has moved, that's one we should look at, right? To be sure. So what we want to do here is make this work in trial and camera space, like our to-do said. So we want to do is say, all right, well, we already know the stuff we were computing with that diff before. We already know where the guy is relative to the camera because his high position is now exactly that, right? So all we really need to say is, okay, if the camera following entity high position, right? If the camera following entity high position is if that is greater than however far we allow him to walk, then we know we need to move. The same is true, right, for the other directions. These are all exactly the same checks as they were, right? No big deal.
All right, let me just kind of sit with this for a second. So instead of going off of that diff, right, the diff is gone, so I'll just write those out and inundate myself with errors. We'll just go off of this first one. Camera following entity. And was it off the high? Right, and that makes sense because this is relative to the camera, and then here is where we want to change, yeah. But this should be actually, whoops, off the X. That's interesting. I wrote this in and I thought to myself, let me see, make sure, yeah, that's right. So I wrote this in and it didn't give me, OLS didn't bark at me. Because I can do this. I can compare this, what is it, a vector 2? Yeah. I can compare this vector 2 to 9, and that could have easily led to some confusion, right? And I'm not sure exactly in what way this compares. Like, does it doesn't implicitly compare the length of the vector, right? Or maybe it does. I don't know. I'd be curious to know what that would even look like. Like what that bug would be. I guess the camera would just be all jacked up and it would throw us, the camera would get thrown into some place that doesn't make sense. But anyway. Whoops. So we do the same thing, but for the Y. And I think we ought to be just fine now. So if I'm not mistaken, oh God, well, that's not right at all. What on earth happened? So maybe he still needs to do something, but I would have thought that this would have worked fine. Because we're looking at, the player that the camera is focused on, and we're asking, well, no, this isn't right, is it? Because this is some float value inside of a specific, this number is going to be way higher. So this isn't quite right. Maybe it's dormant. P tile map position, abs tile X. Weren't we comparing it off the abs tile X before? Well, I guess we'll see. Oh, okay, yeah. I missed... Oh, no, never mind. That's in there. I thought for a second I was missing this conversion to meters. Well, I guess we'll just see what happens with Casey's code. I don't want to get stuck on this too long.
PY and so on. So when we do these checks, we now will move the abs tile X, the abs tile Y. We'll move all those in the right direction. So what we need to do is we just need to take whatever that difference is, however far the camera moved. So this is the original camera P, right, or the old camera P. We'll do whatever updating we need to do to follow the guy, and then we'll take a look and see whatever that camera's position is now, we need to update all the entities by that, right? So we basically need to say, okay.
Okay, definitely was missing some stuff then. I thought it would be this simple, but I mean, after looking at it, I could tell that it wasn't, because that's just not quite... Well, this still doesn't feel right, this comparison. But maybe it'll turn out all right in the end. We'll see. So we're going to update that, and then up here we want to track that old camera position. And we're still doing this. Does this need to be broken up? Does that trail off? That looks fine. And that's what we're doing right now. Yeah.
Let's take a look at what that tile map diff was again. Let's see, what is that called? Tile map difference. So we need to do tile map difference, and we will go ahead and say from the current camera P, we'll subtract away whatever the old camera P was, right? And that gives us how far we have to move everything. That's that's how far the camera moved from its current location to its new location, right? So if that's the direction that the camera moved, then what we want to do is we want to move everyone else by the opposite of that, right? In other words, this is the D camera P. And what we want to do is have like the object offset, right? So the offset that we're going to apply to all of the entities, so the entity offset is going to be the opposite of that, right? To give you some perspective of what I'm talking about here, we have the screen, we know that the camera was here, and then we did something, and we're going to say, okay, the camera goes here. So entities that were here, right? When the camera moves, if we were to apply the same translation, they would move with us, but that's not what we want. We're moving away from them, so they should be the opposite direction, right? So we want to basically move them the other direction so that when we render them, they'll appear to have slid, if that makes sense. So we want to move them counter to the motion of the camera. So this is basically D camera P DXY, right? That's what we're going to do there. And then we just loop over all the entities, and we loop over all the entities and apply that. And what we could do if we wanted to actually is we can roll that in. We can just straight up roll that in to our update loop. Actually, we could just do this. We could just do this. So v2 entity offset, for frame. Equals nothing, and then we compute it in that case, right? And then when we're in here,
okay, so oh geez, all these fat fingering mistakes. Up here he declares that been a very code heavy day, so I'm just kind of, my brain is feeling spread a bit thin. Entity offset for frame.
For frame equals nothing, and then we compute it in that case, right? And then when we're in here, when we grab that.
Okay. So that changes to that. And well, what is this coming back now? I see. So this should be off of the XY.
And then we compute it in that case, right? And then when we're in here, when we grab that high entity, the first thing we do is just say, okay, high entity P plus equals entity offset for frame. Make sense? Seems pretty reasonable. These got to be addresses, of course, and that has to be an arrow.
So in here, I can get rid of that. Well, are we using this anywhere else? No. I don't want to just have that line in there to have it, so I'll comment that out for now, and if it turns out we need it, then we will deal with that. So I'm going to have to take some time to make sure I understand what's going on here. But I don't think I'm going to do that right now. I'll just kind of marinate on this after stream and think about this. So we're getting the offset from here, where it gets assigned if there even is a camera at all that's following an entity. And we get the difference here. And then inside of what are we doing in here even? We're drawing here. Okay, so we're just updating it according to the extent to which that entity was offset during this frame. I guess the one thing I'm still fuzzy on is this stuff right here. And why this just works. I guess it's because it would be, well, I guess this is still the right value to compare to. It's just that this X is going and changing every single frame. Based on this difference that gets calculated here. Right? Yeah. I'll have to sit with that a bit longer, like I said, but I think I get it generally. Ishmael said, do you have to... I have this weird... I don't know what I'm looking at. Oh, it's YouTube. Hold on. Do you have to change a lot when translating C++ to Odin? You know, they're pretty similar in... Well, what Casey does is fairly C-like. It's not super duper C++ code. I was looking at some super duper C++ code earlier today, actually, and it looks quite different from what he does here. And Odin is actually more C-like, far more C-like than it is like C++. And so it actually works out pretty nicely, but there have certainly been, and if you go back in the VODs too, there are plenty of occasions where that comes up, and I talk a little bit about the differences. Like one that I just went over at the beginning of this stream, right, was using an enumerated array. Let me see if I can remember, yeah, over here, to be able to easily get at all the controller buttons that we care about. And before, I was doing something a little bit more, I wouldn't say hacky, but it just wasn't intuitive, and this feels a lot more intuitive. And I did it more like how Casey did it, just because I wasn't as familiar with this feature of Odin. So there are just some things about that Odin gives you that make it nicer to do certain things that you don't really get as nicely with C, if that makes sense. But beyond that, it's largely pretty similar. But one reason that I continue to enjoy Odin, and will probably keep writing it for a long time, you know, short of something that I can't see right now really causing me some pain, is that there's just a lot of quality of life things. Like Casey has to do some cleverness to be able to get the XY out of that tile map position. And I say cleverness, but he's not really doing anything too crazy with this. He just writes a whole vector3 type eventually, which lets him kind of swizzle the... I don't know if that's actually quite swizzling, but it lets him grab out the X and Y components out of a vector3, which has X, Y, and Z, right, with ease. But Odin just bakes this in and gives this to you for free. Like, there's lots of little things like that, but that's a big one for me, and one of the reasons I was excited to start learning Odin. And it's one of the reasons I continue to enjoy it, because I've already used it a bunch of times this stream, and I haven't really commented on it because I don't want to just, you know, jump up for joy every single time it happens. But whenever I get to use that functionality, it just feels so nice, and it's really cool. So there you go.
Makes sense. Seems pretty reasonable. These got to be addresses, of course. and that has to be an arrow. So I think that's all that has to happen for updating those guys. We'll drop an entity down there, and then we'll drop another one in here. Oh man, they spawn in each other, then they can't leave because the wall prevents the collision. So lame. I gotta fix that. I mean, not that you should ever spawn inside someone, but obviously just the way the collision detector works is just a little wonky there. So yeah. So now that's correct, I believe. And so what we need to do now is oh, we wrapped, which we don't allow, by the way. What's that tile rail? Tiles greater than, yeah. So we don't, since we don't support wrapping, we can't walk off the bottom side of the screen yet, right? Or the left side. That's a massive faux pas, I suppose. We'll have to go ahead and move ourselves to the center. That'll be a good thing that we can do as well for getting us into the position that we want to be in for storing stuff sparsely. So yeah, that's all good. So now we really just kind of need to, I guess one thing we could do is we'll start by making doors. These guys work again, the stairwells. Also, shouldn't we be able to find some other part of the world here that had stuff in it when we came back downstairs? There should have been a place where we came back downstairs, right? Yeah, here it is. Of course, I don't know where it comes back again. I'm lost. Really would help if we had more backgrounds. There we go. Yeah. So yeah, I guess what I'll do, since we're at the 5-minute warning, I won't try and do that today. But that's basically, I guess what we'll do tomorrow is we'll start by starting to deal with putting the walls and the stairs, I should say, in there. That seems like the most logical next thing to do. And then at that point, we should have ourselves in a position to kind of take a step back and look at what's going on with the entities and with everything else, so that we can maybe turn the crank one more time on that and do a little more stuff like, you know, like I said, maybe let's put some monsters in here, let's put some hit points in here, let's put some, you know, some gamey stuff in there, so we can start to see how that entity struct shapes up, and maybe play around a little bit with how we want to structure that. But yeah, so, and we'll try spamming out a lot of entities and having the dormant array and the non-dormant array. Like we'll just try all that stuff a little bit, just to kind of get us to the point where we're relatively certain that we've got things shook out as much as they need to be. I suspect I want to do a couple more things to that high dormant low structure once I have some people simulating out like in the world that's not on camera and so on.
Well, we have a bug. I didn't even bother to see if this would work. So it works in that I'm pretty sure it builds and runs. But the second we try and spawn in, I get a runtime assertion. So let's go ahead and see what that is. Yeah, I'm hitting this just by default, which feels weird because that makes me think that we're messing with the player's position in a really bad way. So I must have done something wrong here when we were following that last bit of code change that Casey was making. Because he did trip that assert, but it only happened when he wrapped. And so if we're starting off wrapping our position somehow, then something has just gone very, very wrong. So this looks fine. It sure looks like that is exactly what we want to do. But it's up here. That's something nasty has happened, I'm thinking. So we take the difference to get that D camera P, and then we assign that offset to the difference in X and Y. There's nothing there that looks particularly wrong. We are comparing off of the camera following entity's high frequency dimension, is how I'm going to put that in the X and Y. And I don't know. Nothing about this looks particularly bad. This is zeroed out to begin with. Shoot. I do not understand why this is happening. And it might just be a thing that I wait to talk about on tomorrow's stream, because I don't know if I want to try and debug this right now. That's so lame. We were fine before. Oh, I have a semicolon in there? What's that about? Get rid of that. If I do not update the entity offset for frame, what happens? We're just off in the wrong place for some reason. So when we go to move the player, like, why is he spawning in a bad place? And I feel like this was working just fine before we... At which point did I start seeing that? Because I remember seeing that and thinking to myself, oh, this is really messed up. Why did it happen? I think... Here's what I'll do. I think it was like the very moment I uncommented this code. Right? Yeah, okay. So what is it about this code that is jettisoning our dude away from where he should be? No fun. Ishmael said, I'm not familiar at all with game dev, so it's very interesting to see how everything is done from scratch. Yeah, I think so too. And in fact, you know, it's such an uncommon thing to even find anywhere, you know. There are some other people that have done something like what Casey has done with this series, but not nearly so comprehensive. And you do see a lot of people doing like devlogs and things like that. Like if they're an indie developer, but you don't see them showing, you know, nobody's going out of their way to show the entire process from start to finish, because it's such an insane endeavor, for a lot of reasons. And I'm assuming it's part of the reason why he put the series on hiatus, but I still think that there is a ton of value in that. And I think for whatever reason, he seems kind of down on it, when like really he's done something that kind of stands on its own and separates itself apart in many ways from a lot of the other programming content that you can find out there. And I do think it's pretty cool and interesting too, because there's so much stuff. Like, it's hard to have an appreciation for just how dense all the stuff going on here is. Probably just heard my dog groaning. He's like, figure it out, man. Figure out this bug. What are you doing? So I feel like this is telling me, because this code looks the same, I feel like this is telling me that whatever the position is that we're updating the entity at its high frequency, wherever we're updating that is, there's some kind of bug in there, because the rest of this looks totally fine. I guess I can try looking at all the places where we update that. So right here is where that would change. And then what are we doing with this right here? We're passing it in to map it into tile space. Maybe something went wrong here. It could be here. And it could be here. But this seems fine to me from what I remember. So I don't know. I'm going to have to sit with this one and figure it out and come back tomorrow, I think. Unless maybe he did have something similar. No, he was able to drop the players in just fine. And then he starts navigating all over the place. And that's what motivated me to be like, wait, can I even do that? And no, I cannot.
Place where we came back downstairs, right?
We were getting pretty far here, to pretty close to wrapping up.
Maybe. I suspect I want to do a couple more things to that high, dormant, low structure once I have some people simulating out like in the world that's not on camera and so on. Yeah. So what we need to do now, let me just put in some to-dos for tomorrow so we know what we're doing. So basically what we need is we're going to need some functions here, right? We're going to need like when the camera moves. So in the case where the camera moves, like there, to do Casey map new entities in and old entities out. Whoa, I forgot I got that zoom feature. Move entities out, and we also want to do some stuff with mapping tiles and stairs into the entity set, and then we'll be good. So I think that's about right, and that is what we will do tomorrow. Okay, we're a little early, but that's okay. I don't want to start something else now because it's going to be a relatively major something. So let's go ahead and go to the Q&A. Please prefix your questions with Q:, so I will see them, and please keep them to be stuff that we did on today's stream or that we did on a previous stream so that we don't get off topic. If you wanted to do off-topic questions, come about 15 minutes before the stream starts, and we will talk about them then.
I think Casey gets on the blackboard here for a second. Well, that's a ways in. Yeah. Well, I'd love to sit here. As usual, I wish I had more time to just kind of sit here and shoot the poo with you guys about, you know, the things that come up during the Q&A. But I've got this bug, and I want to figure that out, and stream's getting pretty long at this point, so I think I'm just going to call it here. It's been fun. Always feels bad to end on a bug, but then I get to enjoy coming back tomorrow and hopefully finding a fix for it. I mean, there's no way it's going to be that sneaky, because I suspect it's just somewhere in the midst of changing this code, and I was starting to feel like that. I don't know. Maybe other people don't get this, but when I've been sitting and coding for too long, and I've already, keep in mind, like, you know, I worked earlier today, so this is like going on, how many hours has it been now? I think I got up at 6:30 this morning. Point is, it's been a lot of hours in front of a screen, and the brain just stops working so good past a certain point, so I start getting sloppy, and probably made a silly mistake in here that once I take a break and come back, it'll be easy to root out. So thanks for hanging out with me. I appreciate it, and we'll look forward to kicking off day 53 tomorrow, where we'll keep on working on this entity system and just continue to flesh it out, and hopefully, you know, retain what's going on, because and that's honestly why I don't mind getting bugs like this, because it gives me the opportunity to really retain the concepts behind what it is we're trying to do. Because to root out that bug, like, I have to obviously step through it and figure out where are all of these things being updated, and like, why are we updating them in the places that we're updating them, all this stuff that just kind of helps it sink in a bit more. It's kind of like a little homework assignment for me to come and do a bit of show and tell on tomorrow's stream. So yeah, thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one. And if I don't, just have a great rest of your week or Wednesday, wherever you're at. Time zones are weird. Yeah. So until next time.